In the southern reaches of Syria, in the shadow of the Jabal al-Druze mountains, the city of Suwayda has once again become a microcosm of the broader conflict that continues to tear Syria apart. What began as localized clashes between tribal Bedouin militias and Druze factions has escalated into one of the deadliest confrontations since the fall of the Assad regime in December of 2024. The violence, which erupted after the government's latest failed attempt to consolidate control, left more than 1,000 people dead and pushed Syria's fragile post-war transition to the brink of collapse. After a week of bloodshed, a ceasefire was declared. Now, more than 24 hours later, the fighting appears to have paused. Bedouin clans have withdrawn. Internal security forces have redeployed across key points in Suwayda province. The streets, once filled with gunfire, are quiet again, but the silence is deceptive. The ceasefire, while holding for now, is built on distrust, unresolved grievances, and a dangerous undercurrent of sectarian resentment. It is a ceasefire in form, not in substance. Officially, the government of President Ahmad al-Shara claims success. Security forces, they say, are now positioned to protect civilian infrastructure, prevent further clashes, and ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid. But in reality, control remains contested. Power on the ground belongs less to the state and more to an unstable constellation of armed actors, tribal coalitions, and rival militias with shifting allegiances. Local Druze communities, once wary of both regime and rebels, are now acting as gatekeepers in their own province, blocking government envoys, deciding who enters and who does not. The health minister himself denied entry. Only the Syrian Arab Red Crescent was allowed through to deliver medical supplies under Druze supervision. And in this emerging political geography, where the state nominally governs but does not truly control, Suwayda reflects a larger truth. Syria, in its post-Assad incarnation, is not a unified country. It is a fragile, patchworked collection of zones where ethnicity, sectarian loyalty, and tribal allegiance define the rules of order. President Ahmad al-Shara, for all his declarations of national unity, is presiding over a state in name, not in function. To understand the deeper significance of Suwayda, one must step back from the headlines and examine the strategic underpinnings of the conflict. Since the ouster of Bashar al-Assad on the 8th of December, 2024, Syria has been undergoing what many in the international community hoped would be a transition toward civilian governance. The sanctions were partially lifted. Western governments adopted a cautiously optimistic posture, and diplomatic channels reopened. But beneath the surface, the state was never truly rebuilt. What emerged instead was a power vacuum. President al-Shara's political faction, known as Haytham, entered Damascus with an estimated 45,000 fighters. That number, while significant, was never sufficient to administer a nation fractured by 13 years of civil war. The Haytham movement, by its own admission, lacks the institutional depth, territorial legitimacy, and cross-sectarian support to govern alone. To compensate, the interim government turned to external patrons. Turkey, Qatar, and other regional actors began sponsoring the formation of new security forces. These units were hastily assembled from the remnants of Sunni Islamist factions, former Free Syrian Army brigades, and various tribal militias that had fought on different sides of the war. The result was a decentralized, loosely affiliated network of armed actors, many of whom maintain only a nominal allegiance to the central government. In practical terms, this means that Syria's new leadership is not operating with a unified chain of command. It is, instead, attempting to co-opt rival forces, rebrand them as auxiliary security personnel, and use them to project an illusion of state control. In Suwayda, this strategy has backfired. The escalation in Suwayda was not spontaneous. It was the third major outbreak of sectarian violence since the Assad regime's fall. The first occurred in March of 2025, when Alawite communities along the western coast were targeted in a wave of retaliatory attacks by Sunni Islamist factions. The second, in April, involved clashes in the town of Jarama, where Druze residents were again subjected to militia violence. Now, Suwayda. 3 times, in 3 separate regions, minorities have been attacked by irregular forces operating in zones the central government claims to control. The pattern is no longer deniable. According to Middle East analyst Dr. Jonathan Spire, this violence is not merely the result of residual tribal tensions. It is, in part, a consequence of how the new regime has chosen to govern. Spire points to figures like Abu Amsha, a notorious militia commander from northwest Syria, implicated in disappearances and extrajudicial killings during the war. Abu Amsha, despite his record, was recently seen coordinating the movement of tribal fighters into Suwayda province. He is not a native of the region. He is not accountable to local leadership, yet he appears to act with impunity under the banner of the central government. This, according to Spire, is the core problem. The regime is not deploying neutral peacekeepers. It is empowering sectarian actors with violent histories and inserting them into regions where their presence inflames local tensions. These are not state builders. They are war survivors, many with scores to settle, and their presence in Suwayda, under official sanction, sends a chilling message to Syria's minorities. The message is clear. The new Syria may not be so different from the old. The Druze, a historically marginalized and secretive sect, now find themselves once again at the center of a storm, not of their making. Internally divided by politics, but bound by communal identity, the Druze have long pursued a policy of guarded neutrality. They maintained autonomy during the Civil War, avoided overt alliances, and preserved their self-defense militias. But neutrality is no longer an option. The recent clashes have led to a wave of reprisals. In cities like Aleppo, Druze university students have been assaulted. Protesters have been harassed and beaten. The community is being blamed not only for defending itself, but for existing outside the dominant Sunni Arab narrative of the new Syria. And to complicate matters further, Israel's limited intervention, ostensibly to protect Druze civilians, has backfired diplomatically. Though well-intentioned, the Israeli airstrikes, which resulted in Syrian casualties, have fueled anti-Druze sentiment among other Syrian factions. Now, to many Syrians, the Druze are seen not only as outsiders, but as potential collaborators. It is a dangerous perception, and one that the interim government has neither condemned nor corrected. This silence, in the face of rising sectarianism, is not simply a failure of leadership. It is a tacit approval of exclusionary nationalism. What then of President Ahmed al-Shara? For now, he stands on the world stage as the man who replaced Assad, a civilian reformer, a transitional figure. But transition to what? His legitimacy is fragile, his power base is narrow, and his ability to enforce national cohesion is increasingly questioned. Hayatham, the movement he leads, remains a minor political actor with insufficient infrastructure. Its survival depends on external sponsorship, and its security forces rely on loyalty from actors who share neither ideology nor command structure. Al-Shara is attempting to build a centralized state from decentralized forces, a state without monopoly over violence, and without the institutions to mediate sectarian grievances. The bombing of the Marlayas church in Damascus on the 22nd of June only underscores this failure. The group that claimed responsibility, Saraya al-Sarsunna, includes former members of HCS militias that were once aligned with the new government. These are not rogue cells. They are the very instruments the regime helped empower. If this is the architecture of Syria's new security state, it is built on fault lines that are widening with every new confrontation. The future of Syria remains uncertain. Ceasefires, no matter how well-intentioned, are not peace. Syria's path forward depends on a complete reimagining of governance, one that moves beyond sectarian patronage and militia co-optation. It requires a civilian state apparatus that includes, rather than excludes, the country's minorities, a judiciary that is independent, a military that is national, not tribal. The Suwayda crisis has laid bare the inadequacies of the current model. Until there is accountability for atrocities, until there is representation for all communities, and until militias are disbanded or subordinated to a unified chain of command, the Syrian state will remain fractured. President al-Shara may claim victory, but it is a victory over symptoms, not causes. And the world, watching from afar, must now ask whether Syria's post-Assad era is a true transition or merely the reshuffling of old power under new names. This is not just a Syrian crisis. It is a regional one, a geopolitical one, and, potentially, a generational one. For in the vacuum left behind by the fall of one dictator, 100 fiefdoms are beginning to rise. And, unless that dynamic is arrested, the war for Syria may no longer be about territory, but about identity itself.